Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about the Beatles. The date of this recording is February of 2014, and incidentally, this month marks the 50th anniversary of the Beatles performing here in the United States. It was a little bit of a subdued affair when they first arrived. The United States was just getting over from the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And the Beatles arrived in I guess late January of 1964. They stayed at the Plaza Hotel and they appeared on the greatest program around at the time, the Ed Sullivan Show. The Ed Sullivan Show was everything in 1964. Everyone watched it. It was a little touch or leftover from vaudeville. And it's kind of interesting when you watch the Ed Sullivan Show. I mean, you'd have like famous singers, you'd have rock performers in between someone spinning plates, or perhaps dancing bears, or trapeze artists. It was a little bit of everything. And of course, the Beatles came on. And I was there. I remember watching this on TV. And I was mesmerized. Of course, I couldn't hear too well because there was so much screaming going on. But that took place at what is now called the Ed Sullivan Theater, which is where the David Letterman show is done today. 50 years. You know, when I think of the Beatles, and, in the old days, when the Beatles came out in 1964, um, it was a totally different world than what we have today. You had three different ways to hear the Beatles. You could hear them live, which was not easy. Even if you did hear them live, there was so much screaming, it was hard to hear them live. You could hear them on record, or you could hear them on radio. And one of the great things that was happening in the early 60s was the new thing called the transistor radio. I remember seeing them, and you could sit there and tune it to your radio station. You could hook a little plug into it and have an earplug that would go in your ear, and you could hear music and you could wander around. It was something new and exciting in 1964. I remember having one. It was really great. And I had some Beatles stuff. What I had also when I was a kid, I had a Beatles guitar. It was a plastic toy, but it was a great thing. It had their picture on it, and I wish I had it now. It's a collector's item. All the stuff with the Beatles is extremely collectible, but I don't have any of it. I had Beatles hats, I had Beatles shirts, everything. It was just the world of the Beatles at the time. And if you think about something else with the Beatles that's really amazing in a social view, how many times can you actually say a musical group changed the very face of life on Earth? They did. The Beatles, when they first came out and appeared, let's say, on the Ed Sullivan Show, they were dressed in jackets and ties, were quite formal. They were very proper to a degree. And within a short while, their clothes started to change. Their hair got longer. Their music changed. And the odd thing was that we, as a people, started to change with them. And there was this massive social change. If you think of the world at the beginning of 1964 and look to the world when the Beatles ended, which is 1970 when they broke up, two very separate, different worlds. Look at the way they dressed in the beginning and look how they dressed at the end. Think of, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That was amazing. The White Album, Abbey Road. There were so many fantastic recordings and basically stylistic performances and outfits that would affect us all. Another thing that's really interesting about the Beatles as well is that they did change our social views, our hair, our clothes, our outlook, the very way we acted was all changed by what we call the British invasion. It wasn't just the Beatles, but they were the first to really do it, and they had the most profound influence. You know, you think of 1964, that's the year that the World's Fair would be in New York City. And the World's Fair was kind of a stuffy thing from past ages. And the Beatles were the new world order in a sense. And so we all changed with the Beatles. Life itself changed completely with the Beatles. And this month basically is the 50th anniversary of their arrival here in the New York area. It's kind of amazing to think about it, especially if you remember it. You're not exactly pleased about it to a degree because 50 years has gone by. But I can say this, that I loved the Beatles then, and I love to hear the Beatles now. 50 years, of course, has changed a lot of things, but that initial liking and love of the music that they did is still with me. And I know it influenced other people's as well. It influenced a lot of other musicians. It even influenced my grandfather, I have to tell you. My grandfather was a World War I veteran. He had been born in the 1890s, and I used to play the Beatles all the time, and he was retired at the time. He was retiring, and he used to march through the house and be outside working, and he'd be singing marches. I mean, World War One never was too far away from our house, and he was always singing "It's a Long Way to Tipperary" and "Over There" and "Sonny Boy" and everything else. But he kind of made a march out of "I Want to Hold Your Hand," like "I want to hold your hand, 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 hand," and he'd march around singing the song because he heard it so many times from me. So it was probably pretty shocking for him, just like it is for me at this point in my life to listen to new music now. I go, wow, that's interesting. And I try to incorporate some of it into my life, but I realize I am of my time. And my time started in music with the Beatles, the Fab Four. And it's amazing. You know, it's hard to think of the Beatles getting older. You know, we've lost two. We had the assassination of John Lennon, and of course, we also had another death. But the thing is, there's two left, and they're very important um, in the history of sound recording. They're very history of the social outlook of the world. Once again, as I said, and I'll leave it here, how many groups can you honestly say have affected the world as much as the Beatles did?